Hello, viewers. Good afternoon. Welcome to this episode of the Citizens Chat Show. Well, I'm sure if you took a random sample, or even a random guess rather, and asked a question that which countries in the world are a beacon of democracy, I'm sure the United States of America, the United Kingdom, among other countries would appear, at least among the first top 10 or top 5 guesses. Well, but in the recent past, we have seen certain unique incidents happening. For example, in the UK, resignations of prime ministers. But also we know that the USA is approaching the midterm elections, where we shall, witness the House of Representatives changing seats, but also some portions of the senators shall be going for elections as well. But, there have been cases from the FBI, but also the Justice Department around, Trump's allegations that certain documents were smuggled from the White House. Well, that and much more in this episode of the Citizen Chat Show. Of course, we'll try to evaluate this with comparison on how this affects Africa as a continent, but also deep down Uganda and our democracy. Well, I'm joined by a panel of distinguished citizens of this country. That is now my humble pleasure to introduce to you Joseph Ohcieno from the Uganda People's Congress and also a media personality. Joseph, many thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Good to be here, and as I said, I'm Ohcieno.
Ohcieno.
There you go.
Sure.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Yes, next to Ohcieno is Dr. Deus Kamunyu from Makerere University. Many thanks for joining us, Doctor. Good afternoon.
Thank you, KIdega. I'm always happy to you, and especially on issues where common sense leads me, and I'm happy to be here.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ohcieno, let me just start with you. In your own words, we have been seeing resignations of prime ministers. Perhaps this is a new trend of democracy, that where you feel you cannot meet the demands of the people, you just have to relinquish your responsibility. Is this a new trend of democracy? But also, what are the reasons behind Elizabeth Truss and Boris Johnson's resignation? What underlying factors led to that?
Thank you. I must say it's a rather misleading headline, Decline of Democracy. It's actually particular to the young Ugandans who are saddened now to have been born in a dictatorship and have not really seen democracy at play. This actually, in my opinion, is a sense of maturity and responsibility in democracies. The Americas that you talk about, including the questions of midterm elections, they're important because there's a tradition in that free democracy, notwithstanding Trump, that once an elected leader comes in place, they begin to subject them to critical scrutiny within day one, including the composition of their cabinets, their teams, what do they say, including their body languages. So that by the first 100 days, those assessments of what will have happened by those respective leaders will be faced very critically, particularly by you guys in the media and much more so the population. So they are judged. It means, therefore, that by midterm, in America's case, which for the full time is 4 years, just about in between 2 years, it's already a taste of the entirety of the process. And in fact, governing political parties struggle to do well. Why? Because the citizens are holding those in powers that be to account. To the extent, therefore, that citizens consciously say that, well, if these guys are holding state house, they control state house indeed, and they're controlling maybe the lower parliament or the upper parliament. Voters actually try to freely and voluntarily on their evolution to do the checks and balances by voting the other side. So that's for America. Then coming to Britain, the resignations, yes, those resignations are absolutely welcome stuff that I hope sometime it will happen in Uganda. In Uganda, ministers don't resign. They go to prison, they come back, and they still boast. Ministers commit and cause atrocities and scandals, including national leaders. Presidents come on television and they say, I am the one who made that mistake, that cost you $1 trillion. Okay, come beat me. And they continue, they do not resign. So that is the true contradictions you're trying to present. In the case of Britain, the fact that the move from one prime minister to another has been directly the result of the pressures of the citizens. Public opinion matter, people's opinion matter, people's mandates matter. And in fact, even when the pressures are coming from inside within the Conservative Party, which is basically the Parliamentary Conservative Party, they know that the more the guys at the top keep doing and making the mistakes, and as the population watches, if we don't take action in Parliament, at the next elections, we're going to be wiped out. Now, that is what we need to learn. And if there are some guys in the National Assembly in Uganda, they ought to need to know that. They should not take instructions from the guys in State House. The only reason why they do that anyway is because they know at the end of the day, it's unlikely that someone who's been elected as an MP in Soroti and MP in Kiruhura basically has got the direct mandate of the people, because either they've been whipped, or ballots have been stuffed, or there's been monetary advantage, which monetary advantage is managed from the citizens. In Uganda, Milton Obote offered to resign in 1983. That's official. He offered to resign in 1983, Deus, when he had a meeting with all religious leaders and Mr. Paul Kawanga Semogere. He had, was it 83 or 83? I think early 83. And he had suggested that, look, the propaganda, the bad press that elections had been rigged, the bad press that there's huge human rights abuse in this country, but particularly back to the elections being rigged, which is stopping our country from moving away post-Amin and trying to deliver for our people and deliver for young people, is that if you guys come with confidence, with evidence that not only the UPC rig elections, but there's sufficient irregularities in the elections, parliamentary elections in Uganda, enough to have overturned, to have caused the difference, I would resign even in advance of these matters going to court. I'm told Paul Semogere kept mute. This is official, Uncle Paul. And Cardinal Subuga, then the Archbishop of Kampala, was the one who broke the silence by saying that, well, that's not why we're here and things like that. Meaning, resignation is a democratic process. Resignation is power. Resignation is responsibility. Resignation is response to people. It hasn't happened here. It should be happening in Africa generally more. We've seen resignations in South Africa, people power and the might of the people. However, back to the UK, what really is happening is an offspring of, if you like, the chickens coming to roost over Brexit. Extreme white, basically racist, conservative British guys who, particularly within the Conservative Party, who have always been taken up by this thing called Europe, as they would call it, the other side. Over the years, every other time the issues in the Conservative Party was about Europe. So Britain has always been this tiny little island that controlled the rest of the world, but never came to terms with the reality that the empire thing had gone, and that Germany was now a bigger nation than them, and France is a bigger nation than them, and there will be other emerging nations coming up. So once David Cameron, poor David Cameron, came in to dare the Conservative Party that in order to resolve our internal issues, we shall offer a referendum on whether or not we should stay as part of the European Union. He dared the population, calmed the extreme right wings with Boris Johnson and others, and Britain voted out of 7 or so years ago. Since then, directly as an outcome of this, an ideological thing, directly as an outcome of this, Britain has found itself isolated. Britain has, in a very silly way, forced itself out of the largest and most powerful trading bloc in the world, the European Union, which apparently grew itself on the framework of the East African community of the 60s. So, young man, have hope and have confidence in yourself that we also can be copied. And so they pulled out. What happens? The British economy started fumbling. The British economy is struggling. The British citizenry now have got to, British business have got to struggle. It is no longer business as usual that you just take it, you can't go via the Channel and go to France and Belgium and come back and buy your goods and sell. It's no longer that. So the chickens are becoming to roost. While that very quickly happens, the internal disputes with COVID and the struggling economy, and particularly because the British citizen, just unlike the Ugandan citizen, will demand from their governments, things started getting hard. Cameron goes after losing the referendum. Theresa May comes after struggling with this. She couldn't deliver on the whole thing. She's dumped. She dumps herself. Boris Johnson, who was the master of this racism, but presents himself as the Anglo-British, more British than the British, himself actually has got an interesting background, takes over, delivers on that, but because it's such a froth, It becomes such a powerful thing that it could not be sustainable. The guy jumps up because he's pushed. Then comes in poor Liz Truss, who holds for 45 days. After Liz Truss, then comes young Rishi Sunak, the East African Asian, who's come in, and we might clap, and it's fair enough, we must clap. People say that, well, he's a first-time ethnic minority taking charge. That's fair enough. David Cameron is the one who picked up the idea, post-Obama, by the way. When they realized that these things happen, ethnic minorities are beginning to take over progressive left political parties, the Democratic Party, and indeed the Labour Party. Granted, he recruited mainly from the Asian and African communities. These guys came down. In the Sunak's case, these are guys with very right-wing ideological drives, and so they come. So Sunak is a minority, we can clap for it, but of course it's a turnaround. The British controlled this country for over 70 years without even a vote. So there is nothing really new and powerful and exciting about it. But quickly, to close this conversation in context, after that, in terms of all these things are happening, the British are changing because public opinion is changing. The British are pushing their prime ministers because when you come like Kwasi Kwarteng comes as a chancellor, delivers a budget, it's a terrible budget. Within 45 days, within a few days, actually a few weeks, he's forced to resign. It's not good enough. Pressure continues, including within the Conservative Party, and Liz Truss goes. What does it mean? We are saying that, well, if the Ugandan citizen, and that is why political rulers, particularly military rulers in Africa, fear public opinion, fear the power and the voice of the mandate of the people, fear ideological contestations of the left versus the right, fear the competition of ideas between UPC and NRA. Put your program on the table, put our program on the table, let's contest it, and let's run it over 6 months and see the evidence. That is really what is happening. So it's not less democracy there, more democracy, but it's showing you guys what you need to be able to do so that actually we uplift the well-being of our people.
Wow. Doctor, you've heard from the congressman, very passionate. Boris Johnson led the Conservative Party to, I think, its most popular election victory ever since 1987. But, and that was in 2019. Less than 3 years down the road, he threw in the towel. Liz Truss came in after, and not even 45 days into her term of office, she throws in the towel. But also, we must factor in that in the 45 days, 10 days were off to mourn the Queen. So she was actually in office for about 30 days. But the gist of the matter is what is causing these resignations? Because they seem to be happening more often than not. In your own words, you have heard from the congressman, but let's hear it from you. What do you think is inspiring this?
Thank you. First of all, I have this very deep belief that democracy is the business of the people. Because even when you look at English definition of democracy, or the Western definition of democracy, it's the government of the people, for the people, and by the people. People are everywhere. It's a business of the people. So they are the ones who appoint and disappoint. And shortly before we came on the show, I was talking with Joe. We were talking about personal things and looking at frame of reference. So when you're looking at these things, you better have a democratic frame of reference. Like, you look at them from the democratic eye, the government of the people. Who is changing these leaders? Is it the military changing them, the Pakistan way, or any other? Is it the weather changing them, or there's a storm and they shift position? It's the people. So how we should evaluate this is, are the people in charge of their business? And who are these? The representative of the people. You know, the genesis of the House of Commons, the communes and their representative finally House of Commons. I mean, they are true representatives of the people. And they are conducting the business of government. And so that's how we should evaluate this whole thing. So if it was sliding out of the people's business agenda, and that it's being conducted at the King's Palace, so it was being conducted at the military
Headquarters or somewhere.
would say, democracy is done. But it's the business of the people, and we should clap for them. They are an example to learn from. So the changing then of leaders as a business of the people is true democracy. So it means that the people want service delivery. People have an agenda. Parties have an agenda. And I also like the way the UK, it's actually a mature system. The parties are the ones that take the front seat.
Yeah.
You win as a party. And then the party chooses its leader. And if you can't be up to the business, if you can't take the heat, you get out.
They withdraw it, yeah.
And there are benefits to that also. You go with your retirement package and you get out. So the people are in charge. So whether it's and I followed very carefully because I follow their politics since my Irish connection. I studied in Ireland, and I kept watching and Scotland as well. So I am very. So I followed, and I realized at some point the way Boris Johnson was behaving, and the way the British want to take themselves, because they may do the dirty thing. They are the masters of colonial master. They are, but they want to maintain this nice, public image, British customs, British honesty, and I realized Boris Johnson was lying through his teeth and very dishonest in many ways, according to the British standards, and it was a matter of time. They were going to give him a run for his and the people conducted their business as is expected and kicked him out for very many reasons, including the last one being this scandal of appointing a sex suspected sex
the deputy chief whip of the
Conservative Party. But of course, all this comes, like Joyce saying, amidst tensions that are rising from a declining economy, the loss of a big, as a result of the loss of a big trade bloc, the consequences. Actually, Brexit is what is causing. But to them, some commentators, leaving alone this British racist kind of, and talking about immigrants and all that they are running away from, I think there are those who argue that their independence could make them more, more creative, more self-determined, more outward-looking. Maybe they were relaxed and they didn't want to be relaxed. There are some who argue that it's a matter of time. They will redefine themselves. But it's also true that the consequences of breaking are with them, and that's what is causing. And amidst that, everyone is angry. So if you are in the middle of everything, you can't put up with it. And I pray for the new Prime Minister. I realized last night he was in Parliament answering a few questions. I realized, he's a bit sharp and
he's quite articulate. Yes,
quite articulate. Yeah. He may pull it out, and if he's sincere enough, you could take it on. And you better be careful. He's a child born out of heat here in East Africa. The East African roots, they raised him that way. So he could be hard enough and Democrat, and then you could take them on. But I'm worried. The racists again. I was watching a video and many other interviews on British radio that I keep listening to. It seems the racists are not seated. Is more likely, on the basis of racism and other issues that come with this white dominance. He may lose. They may lose the general elections as part punishment for such a decision, because I realize that some people think he's not British enough. He's from India. He is a man of color. They seem to say this thing of Britain is about British people. It's not. It's not about. Can I be a president of Pakistan? Someone is asking. Can I be a president of an East African country? Can you go there and become? So they are also saying, yeah, this is a British thing. And so we can't allow anyone. But that also shows you how triumphant democracy can be. That it breaks barriers such as those. That those who thought about democracy actually should be applauded, because it's a superior principle. That it so happens that when it takes root, even if you resist it, it has the ability to push one Joe from Uganda to sit at the table with the Queen.
Yeah,
It has the ability, and that most of those who grow up in it are more likely to appreciate you because of your good ideas, because of your abilities, than where you come from, where you were born, who grew you. And so those racists, of course, will remain. But the majority, it shows you that the majority could be moving towards appreciating that we are all born equal before our Creator, and that we should also be given chance to enjoy our being, this one life together. And that's what I think. So in concluding this part, I think those, like Joe has said, those thinking that what is happening in the US or the UK is some kind of decline in democracy.
It's an upgrade, in fact.
Instead, they should realize that actually democracy is so fragile that if people go to sleep, the racist, lunatics, mafia, can grab it. So they should protect it jealously.
Thank you, Doctor. Congressman, let me just come to you. And I want to pick a phrase that he has used: give someone a chance. Do you think Liz Truss wasn't given enough chance? Because if you look at the issues surrounding her resignation, were issues of the market bonds, issues around the economy, really. Yes. I mean, she was less than
real issues.
She was less than 2 months old. Issues. So if we are to go by what Doctor is proposing, that we give people a chance, do you think Liz Truss was given a chance to make her claim to the country?
Do you know, I think the more we study British politics and British democracy, particularly as Uganda, which is stuck with one leader older than you, you realize exactly what Deus is saying. It's an extremely exciting system. It is not about Liz Truss, and that's what I was trying to throw in. It's about the ideological contestation of left versus right, the extremes of neoliberalism versus the progressive left, which is by and large is led by the British Labour Party, which is a sister party to UPC, but I'm not selling that. I'm simply trying to tell you that once Brexit happens, an open, relatively free market economy called Britain almost suddenly collapses from the empire element into which it was. In fact, what brought down Liz Truss was, in very specific way, unfortunately linked to her and her good friend, who's Kwasi Kwarteng, who was her chancellor, that disastrous decision to on a mini budget to actually cut taxes for the rich. And by the way, you guys, the rich here does not mean this guy is the average lawyer in town. The rich here means the Mulwanas, but with a dubious record, in Uganda. So the top rich, 1%, you give them tax cuts, and yet you cut benefits to the lower ordinary people. That's very important. So what sank these two is precisely what needed to do so. That after Brexit, after COVID, after 10 years of conservatism and austerity, life hard on the ordinary people, life hard on public services, life hard on public pay bargains that we're discussing with the Deus, teachers, nurses, doctors, train drivers, workers. I was in London the other day on the strike for train drivers, people demanding for higher wages. And then you come at dubious privileged conservatives like Rishi, who happens to be over 700 million pounds richer. So you come with this kind of not knowing the population that you're serving, because their leadership is serving, and then you cut taxes for the privileged when the ordinary people are living on what they call food banks. People come and get food banks, including in front of my house, there's a mini food bank there for people who are, on the lower end of the wage. The population simply said no. They said these guys are out of touch. That is what sank her. So it was a matter of policy that sank her and her chancellor, and that is why I said average conservative MPs themselves, and conservatives will tend to be the more privileged, guys relative to the others, simply said no, this is a crisis, we can't handle this. If we continue with this very unpopular process, we are going to be wiped out. In fact, recent opinion poll suggested that the conservatives, who had the biggest majority, as you say, since 1987, could be reduced to a political party with 50 seats, and Labour would possibly get a parliamentary majority of nearly 400. What does it mean? It means the volatility and fluidity and the response of the power of the people. That you go down there, there's public scrutiny. You put in a program and an agenda and you send to the population. They buy it through voting for you. You don't deliver it, they sack you. And they sack you by withdrawing their confidence. That is what democracy is. That is what we need in Africa generally. South Africa sort of happens a bit in a few other countries. That is what we need in this country, in Uganda. And you know what? In the 60s, it happened here. In the early 80s, notwithstanding all the other challenges, we attempted to reclaim that. We urgently need a process in which a political party puts a program on the table, others put program on the table. We sell them openly and freely and democratically to the citizens. Those opinions, the views that win the majority position, takes government, but they also scrutinize and make sure that they deliver. So when you become a leader, you have responsibility. And that now brings me back to the question of leadership. Those leaders are resigning not because they don't like Downing Street. They're resigning not because they also have children whom they wish to take over from them. No, they're resigning because they know it's a humility and a responsibility. Blair said, even if it is only one day at Downing Street, it's a privilege that we must accept with humility. So 45 days is actually good enough for Liz Truss. Actually, many other British are simply saying that I wish it is actually my son or daughter coming in the next 10 or so years. So it's really more about that. Ugandans need to be able to learn that. Africans need to learn that a little more. And as I said, to their credit, it is really Conservative Party under test. And final point, do you know what? The demand now is for a general election, which I support. That for one party, changing prime minister, that's a bit of, you can call it a relative weakness, internal weakness. But it's the internal weakness because the Conservatives bribed the Liberal Democrats. The process in Britain, in Westminster, was that election calling was at the mercy of the prime minister. They could call it at any time. So these guys, when they realized that they were in the shaky grounds, they had a coalition with the Lib Dems and the Liberal Democrats, and then they decided to say, we're going to have a fixed parliament, which does not exist, fixed 5-term parliament. So now there is a public demand for calling a general election and maybe reviewing this and that. I think the more they do that, the better it is, because that is the best of democracy, where something happens, you resign, something happens, public opinion happens, and you call election. And by the way, even in Uganda, maybe in the event that I was president of Uganda People's Congress and indeed president of this country in future, going through constitutional reforms, I would possibly even consider possibilities. They've got their own disadvantages because the prime minister or president can take advantage that they call elections when they're most popular. But also it means that the country is not held hostage, like we're held hostage with this bunch. Even after the scandals, after scandals, after scandals, we have to wait. Oh, when is it again? 2016, 26. Oh, and is he going to stand or is it going to be his nephew? Things like that. Yeah. I think it's something that you guys need to be watching.
All right. Fair enough. Dr. Deus, let me just come to you shortly. If we are to explore the reasons that are broadly publicized around Boris's resignation, part of them was that, and I think you did mention it earlier on, but not in depth, is that his deputy chief whip, Mr. Chris Pincher, had was caught up in, I would say, immoral affair. But the question here is the vicarious liability, that leaders must be responsible for those that they appoint in public office. That if an RDC commits an offense somewhere, it should not only be the RDC to be punished, but even the appointing authority needs to be held accountable. So is this what it should be, the vicarious liability? That by the time you appoint someone, then you're vested, you're vouching for them. So should they sway out of the path, then you should also be held accountable. Is this?
Yeah, because the business of the people is serious business. Yeah. You're holding people's lives. This is very serious. I would advocate for that because then democracy would not have you're not there. You're not there as a careerist looking for jobs. You're a leader, for heaven's sake. And one of the tenants.
But he was
Yes.
caught up paying for someone else's irresponsibility, not his own.
Yes, because you should have taken the responsibility seriously of appointing and doing background checks and respecting intelligence reports and maybe the British people think they shared some common grounds. Maybe they were hiding for each other, and this is not, it may not be far-fetched. We've seen scandals even involving princes and they go on and on. And so yes, democracy is a people's business. And it's serious business because it involves lives.
Yeah.
It involves hospitals. It involves, Medicare. It involves education. It involves the future of a country. It's serious business.
Yeah.
And so and this is where we get it wrong. And people take this lightly, especially when it comes to the moral. I keep hearing people say, "You are being moralistic." Yeah, but that's what it is about. A good example. A shining example, because a society that does not have its best at that point, at that level, is a society that, and even when it was the case that the people, for example, in the case of the US, voted Trump aware of his background, because he's not a saint. He was really in the extremes. He was even not as repentant, even in office. But democracy is very interesting. They put him back to vote, and they say, "You man," the majority said, "No, get out, because we don't agree with this in some way or another."
But then, secondly, just as you make that point, could you also indulge yourself in the conversation of the other reason that costed Boris was that the inflation rate rose up to 9.1%. But this inflation rate could have been hinged on external factors. That was the Russia-Ukraine war, where prices of fuel went high.
So just to interject, there they don't act on speculation. Ugandans watch. They don't act on speculations. So it could have been, no, it wasn't. The opposition of political parties critique you. They're not silly. They're not based on what they're told. They're as global as everyone else. So they know the roots of inflation. And by the way, what I was telling you is a real authority, including how these things happen. So the British people know. The British public know. The British intellectuals know. And by the way, British university lecturers, most of them are free thinkers. They think, they act, they guide, and evidence are put out.
Congressman.
Including institutes for fiscal studies, meaning independent organizations come and put these things on the table. So you can't fight it. Yes.
Congressman, are you saying that the Russia-Ukraine war has not caused a global inflation?
No, it was a factor. Every other country.
Exactly.
I'm simply saying.
That was set it out as one of the reasons that led to Boris's downfall. So my question is, wasn't he partly, perhaps unfairly judged? Because some of these factors were beyond his control.
You are a leader to fix exactly that. And that's what it is.
Precisely.
You are a leader to precisely deal with that. If you can't deal with it,
you pack and go.
You get an alternative.
So he should have dealt with the Russia-Ukraine.
You can't do it. Why not? You must make decisions that cause
decisions. These are sovereign states.
The guy had told lies from the time before Brexit. So the combination factors that saw Boris go. It was not about only inflation. The guy had lied. The guy had held parties in.
That is why we are evaluating reason by reason. We did evaluate the vicarious liability, and now we are saying, how about inflation?
No. That is simplistic. We basically pick one for a British Prime Minister. That's one. Even if it was a Ugandan president.
We are going one by one. Well, one by one reason. We shall get to the party issue.
My belief is, you can undermine it or no. My belief is the reason why a leader is there is to deal with the circumstance of the time. Then would let it be. So if the energy markets are in turmoil, you get a leader who understands how to tame them. If you are unable to tame them, you pack and go. And that's the business of the people.
And in fact,
because this is not your household.
What Deus is actually saying.
It's the business of the people.
But most of those leaders, external factors.
Moses.
Yes, but
perhaps you don't have much control.
But you still must deal with them. And when you are reasonably dealing with them, what I like is that they see it. They understand it.
Precisely. And when
They
you get it
don't
wrong,
plan for you.
you say, I'm sorry, guys, I failed, and I failed you. You take responsibility. I failed you. I'm sorry. Let me allow somebody else to come and also try.
Yeah, because okay, I hear you guys, but you see, I'm finding it hard to appreciate the fact that the Russia-Ukraine war led to a fuel crisis. When there was a fuel crisis,
one of the factors.
Yes,
not the factor.
Yes, but it was a crucial factor as well. But I'm saying that should external factors that are beyond a leader's
Can I give you a quick answer?
Exactly be.
Why not?
Can I give a quick answer?
Because you are there to deal with
all
that.
All the countries in the Eurozone, yeah, the only one which was struggling down, check economic figures, was Britain. And did Ukraine war only affect Britain?
No.
Wasn't it the farthest from the region?
Yeah.
There you go.
How about?
But I'm glad also.
How about the party
I'm
issue?
glad also. If it was a Brexit energy issue, I'm glad it squeezed the right person. Boris Johnson was at the forefront of all this. We must leave.
He was pro-Brexit.
We must shoot Russia. You know, we must get it done.
Even Liz Truss. She was pro-Brexit as well.
It took on the right people. So Boris was at the. We keep talking about this.
But shouldn't we?
One of the people, surprisingly, very interesting. My daughter was so sad with the
exit. That Boris went.
10-year-old was so sad that because I watch BBC, was so sad that the
Trust.
The other one. The one he replaced.
Yeah.
Why didn't they give her a chance? She cried when
she was a woman.
When she and I felt, and I'm glad when he came, the job he asked for, which surprisingly has very high standards, dealt with him.
Okay, thank you, Congressman. Let me come to you. You mentioned the issue, the moral question, whereby Boris Johnson during the COVID-19 lockdown was seen at some party,
actually organized the party in Downing Street.
Yes.
The guys in State House can get away with it, not in Britain.
Okay, let me just bring it back to Uganda's context. Not so long ago, there was an event called Nyege Nyege being organized somewhere. And our leaders, the Speaker of Parliament came and said that, this event is immoral. And therefore, it should be questioned. Its organization should be examined. And Ugandans actually say, no, we want our event. So are people actually a reflection of their leaders? Because the people in the UK held Boris Johnson accountable to an immoral act. Here in Uganda, the speaker is saying this is immoral, and the people are saying, no, we want to go on with this act, whether it is immoral or not.
No, you really want to be hard on our people. No, it was not as that. The speaker said it was immoral.
Yes.
What did other cabinet colleagues say? Number two. Number three, what was the position of the head of state? We don't know. Did Museveni take a position on this?
No, he did not.
So then there's a wrong comparison.
Yeah.
And then number two, in terms of the people, which people in Uganda? I mean, I'm not even sure people in Toronto knew about what was happening in Nyege Nyege. Well, so that's neither here nor there. But to make it a more serious point, Boris organized funny parties in Downing Street, booze, But he was not only prime minister, but was the chief instructor saying, people should stay in their homes. And perhaps by then the British were extremely furious that this guy did that, would go ahead and enjoy themselves at their expense, by the way, in Downing Street, you guys in State House, at their expense, while people were being held, and in many other cases, their families, people could not see their families. And by the way, Deus, a number of people were extremely angry, and these are people who had parents in registered homes. So like in Britain, many older people would stay in older people's homes, or people had relatives in hospitals, and they were not allowed, because rules there are not like rules here where you play rules by your nephew, So it is rules are rules. So at the time when you were not allowed to go and see your mother in Bushenyi, the guy who was actually said the rules must be obeyed, is actually busy dancing with other very funny people. That is the way the population seems to say it's unacceptable. And Britain, as you rightly say, the parent of democracy, they take that very serious. And why other economies are coming and growing, they're still very conscious about this British way of living, British way of life, the few things they can get hold on to. And if one of them is public image about Britain, and Boris Johnson came and told them a lie, not only that, did he tell them a lie about the Brexit, by then they claimed that when Brexit is done, I think 680 million pounds will be going to the National Health Service. I talk National Health Service the UPC way because there it is an institution. You touch the health services, you're in trouble. So for them to have to be told a lie about that, of course, most people knew it was not necessarily going to happen. And they took strong exception. And final thing, actually, about the racist thing. The Brexit thing was genuinely, by and large, very much about Britain established English versus the other. And England predominantly are the ones who voted for Brexit, number one. Number two, the majority of the people who were voting for these things were average working class people. So while they mobilized themselves that, Britain, you wait for a day when Ugandans will begin to say, Uganda, you'll see how mobilized they will be. Same thing with Trump, Deus. What happened in America with Trump was a countering Obama thing. When Anglo-Saxon Americans woke up to the reality that minorities are coming to take over. So there had to be an anti-Obama. And the anti-Obama came through the predominantly working class, ironically, white guys. So these guys mobilized and organized and recruited and simply say, no, our best face is the extreme right-wing guy in the name of Trump, who's as flamboyant as Boris, who's prepared to call Obama the Kenyan who's not born in America, and we vote for him. So it's really, really, at the core of this thing is ideological right-wingism, and at the core of it is absolutely racism. Same in Britain, same in the UK, or rather in America.
In America. Thank you. Doctor, let me just come to you. Let's evaluate the task that lies ahead of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. He is, in fact, a former Chancellor of the Exchequer. He is a former Secretary to Treasury, and he has been a Member of Parliament since 2015. Is he prepared for the task ahead of him? The economic pressure. Because I saw a tweet this morning, either a tweet or a blog somewhere, that he has agreed with Joe Biden, who is the USA president, to actually support Ukraine. So is he ready for the task ahead of him to deal with the Russia-Ukraine crisis, to deal with the inflation that is grappling in the country, to deal with all these things that have forced his predecessors out of office? Is he ready? Does he hold what it takes?
I'm told, was it yesterday when he had his first full day in office, answering questions, and first of all, from the outside, he looks sharp. He understands things. He's very energetic. But also, I want to think that when he was the Chancellor Exchequer during Boris Johnson, the biggest issue was actually not the economy. They were trying to hold it. They were trying to deal with the situation. The problem was with this mini budget, which led to reactions in the market. And then once there are reactions there and markets are going down, usually with a £3 trillion pension fund destabilized, you affect workers immediately and they put you under pressure. You have to go. And so the mini budget could, but when he was with Boris, he was struggling with this energy markets, terrible energy markets, and he seemed to understand. He's a rich guy. He knows business. Maybe he knows how to struggle from an Indian shop up to a big corporation. So he understands. So in my view,
because do you think that, for example, because you know that he was a candidate against Liz Truss.
Yes.
He lost to Liz Truss.
Yes.
But when Liz Truss was promising the tax cuts that Mr. Ohcieno has mentioned, Sunak was disagreeing with her. So do you think that he is going to, fast track the issue of,
yesterday he began
re-establishing the tax reforms and things like that,
which I don't recall it very well. And which was welcomed, properly welcomed, and once again he seems to understand what could be causing the economic pressures. Of course, leaving around the Russia, by the way, the Russia-Ukraine war to the West is a strategic war. It's still the struggle between East and West.
Yes, ideological.
It's a struggle, ideological struggles. And so they will still have to say, Britain is the father of democracy in some way, and they have to at least the modern democracy, because we were democratic also in Africa before. But they are the Western fathers of democracy.
The other one, okay.
You were democratic up there.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
Britain has to be with the US by all means, because the West, that's the real West, and the Eastern Bloc. And so by all means, they have to support the energy markets with it. But in my view, reading around these issues, I am convinced that if the West struggles throughout this phase of Russia-Ukraine war and unstable energy markets and struggle through it, and at the tip of it, they may be the winners. The West will no longer be dependent on Russian oil. It will probably go cleaner. It will find alternative energy sources, and Russian oil will. But probably that will be to our advantage. That is, if they don't stampede us. Maybe at that point we'll have cheaper oil now coming from when the West is no longer energy dependent. But back to the issue of whether he's able to fix the economy, I think he will be able to. That is if. But the biggest problem is whether he's believed enough, because real issues are happening. Real economic anchors are getting loose. And the Labour Party is putting them under real pressure with an alternative idea. And that could possibly be the one to drive him crazy. And the fact that the whole Tory party is also looking for the best outcome. Probably that could push. And if it goes to the point of calling for an early election, that's where I agree with him. The Tory party could dive into it could be decimated for a very long time. And I'm seeing the Labour Party is getting an upper hand in a way. The opposition seems to be scoring because the turmoil in the Tory party and the Labour Party seems to be at the stable doing the thing and calling for its total collapse, and with these pensions reacting and all. The likelihood that they will, and also Scotland calling for a referendum to leave
should vote,
all these could play in the hands of Labour, and maybe hope would come, because it seems the Scottish are more like Labour socialist oriented.
The way you push your hands towards me.
The UPC kind of. So I believe Sunak is a sharp guy, and yesterday I was watching very closely his speech, his answers. He seemed to attract at least the charisma, the backbenchers, the Tory backbenchers were shaking.
But I'm sure that is how Liz Truss also started.
No, she
was also
popular. There was full of clothes. She seemed to be navigating. She lacked the charisma, the clarity. I don't know how Joe think, but I felt as someone who followed a bit.
No, clearly they're different personalities, and yes, of the lot since Cameron, Sunak is possibly the most charismatic, most presentable, young, fresh, and very energetic. But of course, he's an extremely clever guy. Old school Oxbridge and Stamford. So, he's fairly sharp. In terms of the wealth is generated by a proxy of marriage. And, next time, there are rich guys in town, I think young men should be looking around.
But I also looked through the cabinet. I think there are good guys there who could help him. And he's balanced it.
Ideologically, from our point of view, knowing many of those guys, I don't necessarily agree. But if it's generally, because I know you want to go on break, I think if it's generally the case in terms of whether or not he's able to do so, no, I think since David Cameron, possibly he may be the most nearest fairly competent person, number one. But number two, British systems work. They don't depend on some guy from the bush. Normally civil service work. But two, because it's really about an ideological thing, the battle in the Conservative Party, Deus, is really not even about party battle and more not about battle of personalities. It is simply the neoliberal, extreme right-wing thing which the Conservatives are sunk with at the moment post-Brexit. That is the lot. How they managed to do it, nothing to do with Europe. The reality has come home to roost in British establishment. At the core, where the Labour Party comes in, is how much wealth do you leave in the hands of the excess privileged top 1%? That is the battle. How do you sort out pay bargains with the middle class to lower working class people and indeed the ordinary, basically, on benefits? How much do you invest in education? How much do you invest in health? How do you invest in public services? And yes, how do you do pay settlements? Anything beyond that, really, usually there will be neither here nor there. The expectation, which is the final point, is this. Election cycles take place in these democracies, and Ugandans watch. There's a strange thing of 30 years of one man is neither here nor there. Election cycles in Britain, normally to 8, 9 years is the other extreme. These guys have got to go into 10 with different prime ministers, granted. It is basically now that conservative ideas are tired. After 10, 12 years, a particular thinking is tired. It doesn't go to 15. So whatever maybe Sunak does, miraculously maybe go with the people to no longer be about him, but about conservatism. People want change. And that change, whether he goes and then they call it general elections, or it happens in the next 2-3 years when they finish their 5-year term, the Labour Party is going to come to win and win massively. But you know why? It is about this competition of ideas. As I said, processes will have been done. So now Labour will have tested many of those things. Now, when Labour comes, they come with new, fresh ideas, sets of programs. They deliver over a period of time. That is the beauty of democracy. And in Uganda, we've not seen that since 1985. In Africa, we need to see more of that. Even in South Africa, where you find within one party, the African National Congress, a leader comes and plays around a program, and then you go to the National Congress, the party conferences, and they say you should go. That is what democracy should be all about. We should see what's happening in Ghana. We should see what's happening in Senegal. We should see, notwithstanding what's happening in Kenya, but of course, thanks to some of the speculations, I think that's a wrong example for the moment, but a possibility of changing governments. Africa needs a situation in which sets of guys come, they are tested by the people with evidence. 5 years is enough to know whether or not it's working. An opportunity for another 5 years. After that, by and large, a particular political party gets sick. Why? Because they begin to play the politics of impunity and entitlement. That is bad news in Africa, but the British are lucky. Whatever happens, whether Sunak goes to the general elections or not, there is going to be a change. And that's a good lesson for us.
All right. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Doctor. Let's take just a short commercial break. To the viewers, we know that you also have interest in this topic, but above all, you have an opinion. There is a comment section right below this video. Share with us your thoughts. If you agree or disagree with any of us, please let us know. But just stay tuned and just see shortly after this commercial break. Bye-bye.
The Citizens Chat Room happens every Friday at 2 p.m. on Civic Space TV Online on Facebook and YouTube. We invite you to be part of this conversation. Civic Space TV, freedom always.
Hello, viewers. We'll be back from that short break. Doctor, let me just begin with you right away. Could this constant or several change of leadership in the Conservative Party be an indictment to the party? Because by the time you elect someone to be your prime minister, then as a party, you've well thought through it. You know that they can handle the situation at hand. You know that they have what it takes. But then if the person that you elect as your leader, 45 days down the road, throws in the towel, or Boris Johnson, who maybe took 2 years, is that an indictment for them and that they could face challenges moving forward in terms of being re-elected?
No, partly yes. Partly no, partly yes. Partly no, because the party, yes, because the party takes the pressure. It's a point of reflection. It's a point of reflection within the party. And the fact that they're also the guys who are choosing people who can't manage is itself an indictment of some kind. But on a lighter note, I want to emphasize that this is what democracy is about. It's what the business of the people is about. If you have elected, because the party is the one that wins, and then they choose a leader. because they have the majority in parliament, and then they choose their leader. Now, it's their business to choose the right leader, but they can get it wrong. They can get the guy who's doing the mouth thing, but when they can't get the ideas moving, or they can't put up with the pressure, or who have some background checks done wrong. So partly yes, partly no. No, because clearly you can't be the guys changing leaders all the time. It means there's something wrong inside the party, and you give an upper hand to the labor, to the opposition bench to deal with you and to show you that. And indeed, they have done well. They said you cannot be the guys. I mean, you are failing. That's why they're calling for a general election.
Yeah.
No, because that's what democracy. Me, that's my view. That's what democracy is about. It's the business of the people. They can appoint and disappoint, and the strength. To me, a nation state, and that's why, and it's been so for a very long time, and that's why I don't want Africa to be judged harshly, because this British public service, the heart of nation, public service, has been known, building a strong public service has been known for a long time. Public service will continue to work. The military will continue to protect the people. There are things that will continue running and protecting these politicians whose ideas are changing. But in some way, they are also worried, because the other day, last night, commentators were saying that maybe because of his beliefs, Sunak's beliefs, he could cut defense budget. They are worried about that. So the military may not be happy in some way, but maybe he's not that silly. He may not do that at the time when Ukraine war is on. But I have heard from you that they have agreed with, meaning the budget may not be affected in any way. Because if you are sacrificing in some areas, then you also need to look at where to cut and fill up, and so the budget will not be affected in any way. So yes and no.
Thank you.
Yes, because they have. I mean, you are changing all the time. I mean, that's bad, and you give the other person. No, because it's democracy.
All right. Thank you, Congressman. As we wrap up the whole UK issue and move towards USA, but of course, as we draw lessons for Africa, is that, do you think the UK should reconsider their Brexit position? Because it's you who made the fundamental argument that, perhaps what is happening could be as a result of them pulling out from a very powerful economic union, or a very powerful economic bloc. Is it time for them to reconsider?
It's not a presumption, it's a fact that this is a spillover, an outcome, a direct outcome of Brexit, and it may be worse going forward. And now that said, Britain, unlike here where people make decisions on big issues lightly, David Cameron as Prime Minister had the right and privilege to call for a referendum. He did. And normally once you've had a referendum, you don't call another one very easily. So it's unlikely that you will be seeing a referendum for return to Europe soon. But it's a common sense thing. Britain ought not have left, and they're regretting. Most people regret, and they'll regret a lot more in future, regardless of whatever happened. I know the net impact of Brexit is negative for Britain, but it's not something that they will be considering to change soon, because practically it's not in their gift to do so. But that said, I think Britain was already a sinking economy anyway. Deus intimated Scotland is instead pushing for a likely referendum to break up from United Kingdom and become an independent nation state. That, if it happened, and whenever happens, I don't rule it out in the next 20 years. And if it did happen, it would be a yes, and almost certainly Scotland would go. Just like what is more likely, which is the one which I much more openly support, is the one for Ireland, which is Irish reunification. In the event that the island of Ireland votes to reclaim its authority from Britain, which the British got by force thanks to British Anglican Empire. That would be the case that the Northern Ireland would vote to return to, quite rightly, to the Republic of Ireland. And so you can see the tiny British kingdom of King Charles getting smaller and smaller. And if that happens, who knows that the Welsh people also don't begin to demand for their full independence.
Are losing ground, isn't it?
Unionists are losing ground because they were artificial.
Republicans are gaining.
Yeah, indeed, because they're artificially placed. And the Republicans, which now that you say so, since I know without prejudice, okay, I don't want to go there. You know, the Martin McGuinness and Jerry Adams, these are brains of Irish republicanism, who at the peak of IRA determined and resolved that they wanted to claim back Ireland. By and large, these guys bit the British establishment. But you know what democracy is all about? Through the competition of ideas, and they said, we will have this engagement through the democratic process. They engaged on issues. Sinn Féin is now the largest party north of Ireland. And you know what? It is through the bread and butter issues of health, of education, of social issues and social services and public services, and the commonsensical debate where you put yours on the table, we put ours on the table. And generally, young people, and that's why Museveni is scared, young people are always generally very open and progressive. They interrogate, and they're willing to change, and they're willing to experiment. In Ireland, the youth came, just the youth and the women who gave it to Obama, are the youth and women who now, by and large, support this very cool way of one united union of Ireland.
Joe, there's a very serious factor which you can take easily, but look at it closely.
Sure.
When you look at the GDPs of those two, Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland and the Union Britain, just simple. The Irish Republic, 101,000 USD. Is GDP. UK, the Union, 34,000.
And they rose.
So these young people will,
once they joined the European Union.
I mean, young people will find more prosperity in the Republic, and they will say, "No, let's go. Why not?" And that's where that's why democracy is good.
Thank you, Doctor. Yes. Doctor, you've heard Congressman Mandy's argument. He thinks that UK should reconsider joining the rejoining the European Union. But I see you're dubbed in a very good Pan-African shirt. Let me just speak to your Pan-African sense. Shouldn't Africans, in fact, be celebrating that the powerful Western blocs that have for so long controlled and dominated the global economy and, and so many global trends are now collapsing? Shouldn't our cynic and our selfish sense that we are Pan-Africans, and it should gladden us that these guys are now eventually having a piece of their own, of their own cake. So shouldn't the underground, the undertones be saying, yes, these guys are struggling, their economies are collapsing, perhaps it's an opportunity for us, Africa, to rise up?
And unfortunately, you're asking the wrong person, because I'm not a fanatic of those wrong cheers.
Of Pan-Africa?
Inside, when actually outside you're so empty. Your people, 90% of your people are living below $1 a day, and then Pan-Africans are dying of hunger and disease, preventable diseases, dying of accidents every day because of roads which can't expand, and etc. Education systems that can't start an economy, etc. And so those wrong. Yes, I am very, very happy to be an African, to be black, to be who I am, that confident, but I also don't want that wrong cheering. So you asked the wrong
What about
person.
the principle of it anyway?
But the principle of it is that Pan-Africanism should function. And it's about, in my simple ways, and I have put my ideas out in the past without fear, it should function. It should function in a way that every African life counts. And that everyone at the forefront of this cheerleading and talking neoliberalism and what should also be at the forefront of protecting each life of an African. And there's no way to achieve this than empowering, constantly and deliberately empowering the citizens to self-determine. through a democratic process. I have that belief because we can't hold back. No one is going to allow us to do it the Chinese way. So the only way is to constantly, rapidly empower our people to self-determine and choose their leaders and constantly do it. And then we defeat so Pan-Africanism is good, but it must function. But in the circumstances where it's like taken over by a club of people who don't seem to be clear, who don't seem, I find it very, so I won't cheer. But it also shows.
But does the economic struggle in the European Union offer an opportunity for Africa?
Why not? That's where I was coming in. So I don't want to cheer those Pan-African things. As a principle, I hold it dear, but in a different view, that this non-performing thing, we will continue talking about, but it's non-performing, it doesn't attract me in any way. I have that, and I will go out of it. It's a mindset somehow. But yes, by the way, even this conflict, energy market problem gives us an opportunity because everyone is drawn to us now with the Ukraine-Russia war. We have so many visitors coming to us. It's high time we started negotiating seriously on what we can probably do. But back home, negotiating for who, I don't know. Maybe for the mafia. But
for the elites, like
the elites, like
Ohcieno.
but if it's high time to begin looking at how we can also take advantage of this.
Yeah.
But I think we are wrong. I don't also want to think that what we are seeing in the West, being unstable and looking at which is an advantage, should be taken lightly. These guys at the core, the people who run this global thing, are aware of this. And that's why I always think that they will turn out, they will come out of this strongly. Like, for example, they've already made some scores in the Ukraine. They already achieved 2 members, NATO. You may talk about the nuclear or the tactical war. It's not possible to, but they have already 2 members. And I was shocked that in the whole equation, I expected Turkey to really veto this. But in one meeting, they were already saying, yes, we are, you can enter, which meant that they have an upper hand. The globalists have an upper hand. They probably have a superior idea in some way. And we need to be very careful. And this is where empowering each one of us to understand how this globe works, and as a deliberate activity conducted by astute leaders, serious leaders, and passing on the relay constantly in a way that every one of us understands what we must do, must be a priority. This is not something one man or 2 men will do. Because of the new information age, everyone is with thinking, well, people in China on their phones. With this information age, we must come back. And this is where the challenge is with the African leaders. Yes, it's an opportunity. But like last night, I think I was talking to someone, Lee Kuan Yew and Singapore. And it was by design. The strategic location of Singapore. But before Lee Kuan Yew, there were several other leaders who failed to exploit that opportunity. So that's why it is important to have quality leaders. And quality leaders, whether by benevolence or by what, must deliberately empower the people to see prosperity in its nakedness coming towards them, so they can appreciate the idea in its totality. And then they rely on the merit and equalization of opportunities, and that then we are able to appreciate it. Until that, for heaven's sake, until empathy takes on, this whole dream, can't we take advantage? Well, it will remain. Maybe someone will come from, people from the east will now come to exploit us. Even more factories by groups from China.
Mr. Ohcieno, let me just hear from you. I know earlier on you made the argument that the UK should reconsider rejoining the European Union because, of course, the obvious advantages, the economic strength and all that. But let me pose to you the same question. Shouldn't African states actually be, in fact, because I know that the global system is a sort of hope system. Everyone is there to hope themselves, to benefit themselves. So shouldn't we actually be saying that, wow, this is a grand opportunity for us as Africa, that the global West is actually becoming weaker economically, and we should be able to organize and see how to exploit those opportunities. As they're mixed up in conflict and all these things, we should be able to organize and,
No,
capture some space.
it's common sense. That's the UPC position. That's what we did in the 60s. As soon as we came to government, our mission was to transform Uganda, and our mission was to take opportunities, including to directly tackle British establishment. We said, look, the wealth that belongs to us in Uganda that the British were trying to sink, we're going to stop it. That's one of the reasons why the British didn't like Milton Obote in the mid-60s. The nationalization of our industries and making sure that, young graduates like yours who came from universities got trained and capacitated so that this country was strong. We did that in the 60s and we did that in the early 80s. I was seeing a clip the other day where Milton Obote chased out Tiny Rollins, who had come in to compromise his government over the oil pipelines and oil deals and the cotton industry. The video is doing around the country. And they sacked and chased away Tiny Rollins, this British dubious businessman who went away to Sweden and met Museveni and started financing Museveni. That's official. It's a public information that needs to be dealt with. Why? I'm directly answering you. Talk about Africa, but I'm saying Uganda. No, our independence leaders took that position. It is simply because some funny, dubious Ugandans played Quisling role to, if you like, to frustrate that one. Number two, across the African continent, the boat is together with Nkrumah's. As early as the early part of our independence, the issue was about this big African continent, that we are secure, we are independent, we are together, we are solid, we common interest, and one in which we begin to trade and engage with the rest of the world on terms, so that this biggest and wealthiest continent in the world, we're able to meet on the global stages at par. It's a commonsensical thing. You young guys should be able to take over from us and run with this agenda. That is the agenda of the future, and I hope there's an agenda that people like me and Deus, we want to reclaim, from this tiring leadership across the continent, and then to forward to yourselves and run within the future, regardless of whatever happens in Britain and or European Union. But that said, I did not say that they should. I simply say that it is possible for them to do so, because it was actually a silly, crazy thing anyway for them to leave Europe. Brexit was a nonsense. It was a fudge, it was a fraud, and you guys were told the lies. Good enough, and some of your media bought it, and some of the media that bought it was some of my friends actually, and some of those media is actually Murdoch Media from Australia, sold off this idea that Britain can move away. But you know what? It was about this empire identity thing. The British should rethink it. The possibility of it happening in the foreseeable future is what I'm saying is very unlikely. But then back to us on the continent. It should not be what is happening in France. It should be what we are doing with ourselves, how we are blocking people who come to exploit us, and how we are taking opportunities, for over whatever is happening, particularly in Europe and the European Union. Interestingly, I know that some very crazy Africans in UK who supported Brexit were claiming that if Brexit happened, Britain would now look less to Europe and more to Africa. And I was asking them that, look, Britain is an Anglo-Saxon establishment over the years, and over slavery and all this thing sold and divided us together over those several years. So you now think that this thing about Britain is being swamped by foreigners' idea of Brexit. All of a sudden, they will push aside France and then find you Ugandans much more special in Britain. It was a very silly, commonsensical argument, which by and large is neither here nor there. But people are entitled to this. I'm using silly in a very guided and very professional, contextual way, not abusive. And so I hope that things like Brexit, become a lesson that in future, when some crazy big idea, let's go to the bush, comes up, people think much more deeply. When crazy big ideas come and say that, look, let's build oil pipeline, we're able to critique. And when decent programs and ideas come from Deus, that let's work with Ohcieno so that we're able to reclaim this country and give a possibility to 3 million young people and make sure there's a guarantee for them for top skills and being able to get big guys with whom they can go ahead and trade with Britain in the future in industry and commerce at a competitive level is an idea worth looking at.
Wow, amazing. Doctor?
But you can't do that also without a clear idea.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, you have to mobilize them. they can easily be, these young people can easily be ruled through the stomach. So you need a very clear, you need to rule through the head. And so there's need for a very clear idea on how this works. And that cannot happen without relentless civic
clear leadership and very deliberate and cautious.
Deliberate young people understanding. And this is where I think the UPC also let us down in a way. They had good ideas. I keep saying that. More, my namesake, childhood namesake. I was called Obote when I was
young
for how I did my hair and
good man.
The way I spoke and the way I looked. And was a statesman, and he still remains. But I think UPC, with its very nationalist good ideas, also lacked the tactic. And I think it was also infiltrated by wrong people, because the UPC I know in my village is not what Joe talks about. It's some kind of group that almost broke our arms and demeaned and undermined our parents. And so, yes, you can have good ideas, but at tactical level, you must, like this oil pipeline guy, you keep him around and say, okay, let's see. But when you also, because you have built a ground, you know that your youth are watching, you know that the value system is okay, and that they are watching, and that they understand that this is an enemy in the long run. And this is what I keep talking.
But where did you think we tactical went wrong? That's interesting anyway. So where did you think
because you know this globalist, this lunatic businessman had capacity to go to diffuse you and to buy your base, and he went and used all and over time.
You're saying we should have bought into Tiny Rollins?
No, it's not what I'm saying. But still, like we said with UK, if the energy markets are bad, that's what leaders are for. They must take it on or resign. There's no option of it. There's no, oh no, we feel sorry for you because, we are facing real bills. We are facing real. So we have some nonsensical businessman coming who is cynical by all standards, whom we also know could cause us, could harm us. So at tactical level, the ideological wing, the idea wing, sits down and says how to make sure this man is subdued. But when you didn't, so do you want to blame? It's done. And someone else took over.
Just to clarify that.
Someone else took over, and here we are.
No.
So at tactical level, I think
they failed to hold fort.
Yes, you are a leader for the time. And so if there is a careless guy whom you know has capacity to undermine you also, find a way. Find a way to make sure that you survive.
So UPC undermine the situation.
No. Actually, leadership is about taking tough decisions in national interest. We systematically did that in Obote 1, in Obote 2. At every stage, I am yet to get one single conviction from anybody of a particular strategic and tactical decision that we made which was not in our disinterest. But at the end of the day, you take a position, it goes wrong, and you take responsibility. For us, we take responsibility for anything that strategically went wrong, and I'm yet to be advised about what those ones are. Now, when it comes to Tiny Rollins, this is the point. Tiny Rollins came on the introduction of Kenneth Kamunyu to meet with Milton Obote and put a proposal. Obote gave a considered view and simply said no. Now, I don't think there was anything else that Obote could have done, and I support him and I'll continue supporting him until we meet them in heaven. Except for Tiny Rollins. When he left, he went to London, and from London he flew to Sweden to begin supporting Museveni. I don't know what else UPC could have done. Then because this crude, terrible guy, do we stop his aircraft? What do we do?
What did ZANU do at that time? I imagine this guy was canvassing.
Actually,
the
ZANU. You're right. Actually,
what did ZANU do?
The ZANU guys were his buddies, but the ZANUs are not UPC. UPC for us, when time comes, when there is a maturity, particularly when Museveni is retired and Chankwanzi is now really a permanent, genuine national institute, historians post us will really judge us very, very fair when it comes to some of these national issues. But I agree with you that in every stage we should be able to think pragmatically. But whatever we do, we must do in the national interest. And I also don't necessarily agree. That is why there's a difference with the conversation we're having in America and Britain. You know, when Al Gore won the elections in the US, and when it was going towards the tipping end, when America was going to begin getting the question of, oh, you terrible guys, Al Gore decided in national interest to withdraw and allow this funny Bush who took us to war in Iraq. So in a way, did Al Gore do the wrong thing? No, Al Gore did the right thing for himself in the national interest, but some funny devilish guy came and ran with it. So when the devil comes and overwhelms, we should do not take responsibility. When the devil comes and overwhelms us, we should just make sure that next time we keep praying, and up, and we demand Jesus is up.
All right.
But of course, that's
let's
a
just
lot of
advance,
pain.
Doctor. Let's just advance gears and just discuss the USA for a bit as we wrap this up. Next month, they'll be going for their midterm elections. The House of Representatives and, of course, some senators will be facing their constituents. What factors do you think are going to determine this next election? We know that the Joe Biden administration has made some achievements. I don't know whether they'll be examined on their healthcare policy or whether the Roe versus Wade case, the Supreme Court decision that legalized abortion, I don't know what factors you think are going to be used to judge or to evaluate the performance of the Democratic Party, and should they do they warrant another 2 years? What factors do you think the Democratic candidates are
going to
what
Joe thinks.
examine
The
against?
times have been there during elections. Truthfully, in the Western world, truthfully, the economy also always comes out as a serious issue. And unemployment usually has a lot to say. And of course now unemployment is going up. I'm told, I read that Joe Biden is scoring high on that. But at the same time, the inflation is also up and running. But yesterday he won an anti-inflation bill, which I think is supposed to stabilize it. Stabilization bill, which I don't know how it will perform, but it seemed to clap for him because he has Congress. So the economy, frankly, the economy usually takes the day.
Yeah.
In all these midterm, how people feel and how their pockets are, how the economic security of families, and these are highly capitalist, individualistic, is so important. And of course,
so I think issues like abortion rights might not surface as a major milestone.
It will be economic.
More so to the gender question. On how the women are going to vote.
Remain the very, but now these swing ideas, the ideas that swing it all towards a win, possibly, because I realized that, I don't know whether it's media and all, I realized also as I watched through this, the anti-abortion judgment, this is a serious matter.
It is.
To the extent that even some states, Republican states, are beginning to say, why did you do this? And some even city mayors are complaining because they've had their daughters, their family members undergo a serious trauma because of lack of as a result of this the judgment. So it may swing it towards. It so happens that there is a bipartisan position on Ukraine-Russia kind of war. But I also saw a letter, Democrats writing to Biden, having their position, taking towards. They are not disagreeing with the support, but they are talking about negotiations. So that may not, because there seems to be a bipartisan support, which to me is very important to Biden. And so he has support of both parties. And like we said, it's West-East kind of politics and capitalism against some other ideas. So, and progressive. So they look at it as a long-term issue. And also the fact that the Trump factor. Trump. I'm still confused about because media seems to be giving some kind of, and I understand because Fox News is always on the side of Republicans, whether they're lunatics or whatever involved, they always go for them. But I think America is traumatized, is still traumatized by Trump's 4 years. To extend that, for me, in my view, I think still his involvement in these midterm elections could play more to Democrats than Republicans, because the young people, especially the young people, and especially those who arrived later, realize that democracy and the left-wing politics, which accommodate rights of human rights, immigrants, etc., are more likely to tilt with a right-wing, hard, racist kind of attitude. And that may play in the hands of Democrats, much as it's hyped by the media that he may swing. Yes, some states could likely to swing. But I think to a very large extent, the economy will speak more. As I follow the ruling,
the Supreme Court
portion,
decision.
the Supreme ruling will also the women vote, and they seem to really be disturbed, and there are those sympathy votes from Republican families that have faced, and in the US, the community thing, beyond the community thing, our country, they share in the empathy with us. And then the Trump factor, the fact that he's seen as someone who almost tipped, who almost threw the US into turmoil, because of that is more likely to play, because his influence could work
against the Republican
the
candidates.
Republicans.
All right, Congressman, what factors do you think will play a crucial role as the senators and other candidates move into these midterm elections?
Usually, as Deo says, in America, it's very precisely the question of the economy that Bill Clinton once said, the economy is stupid. So you lead America and you don't deliver on the feelings of their pockets and their dinner tables, they get rid of you in 4 years, and they do so very quickly. So it's really generally the economy. To the extent that links to the economy, and that's one thing that I normally repeat, particularly when I meet young people, including possibly you, have told you, that in America, once a president is elected, one of the usual things, and Biden did it very well at the beginning, is how many jobs are added onto the economy per month. So Museveni is very lucky, so even in America, I don't know how long. But so how many jobs a month? So he did very well on jobs. Right now, it's been struggling in between. So the economy, housing starts, and apparently infrastructure in terms of refurbishments, where the Obamas played very big. Medicare is a big thing because America, unlike Britain, is almost like what we are being taken on here, where your health is basically between you and your pocket. But I think Americans are beginning to wake up that, well, they're the odd man out of the civilized world. It's not necessarily about socialism. It's very much about the fact that public health should not necessarily be a preserve of the profit motive. It should be the state should be able to play not only a key role, but both key and regulatory role, both key and play active role and regulatory, in the very unlikely event that there's a private health elements to that. The Americans are generally very conservative. Ironically, sometimes they contradict themselves. On one hand, they're very religious, but on the other, they don't want to go and bomb others. On one hand, they're very religious, but on the other, they want to go and exploit and call themselves big, powerful America when they're using African oil or Congolese oil to fill their very large, normally plates for their dinner tables. So it must be that. So I don't know which way to tell. Usually, you would have to be very, very bad, like Trump was actually a disaster, to serve your one term. in many cases, they tend to tilt towards favoring an incumbent president. So for that, in the final, in terms of second term for Biden, yes. But however popular you were, you will, as I said, midterm elections tend to generally favor the opposition. And these are conscious things with voters, and voters actively participate. So Ugandan voters, if you guys are registered, and particularly young Ugandans, you want to go and play chess in the evening, and then you want to complain the following day how you're being ruled not late, it's a matter for you. So that seems to happen. So from how it normally would happen, it would be for the Republicans to win. Unfortunately, as Dale says, this guy called Trump is there and is an elephant and is such an inconvenience to the mainstream Republican Party. But unfortunately, Trump came up as a result of an anti-Obama thing, and as I said, it's an ideological thing. So the majority of right-wing Americans, particularly the traditional, ordinary working class, and sometimes rather ignorant, they play big, Americans, they think Trump represents the face of white Anglo-Saxon establishment interests. So they are stuck with him. Their previous candidate before Trump was a lady called Sarah Palin. I don't know where she is these days, and that was then before Obama. So I think certainly they're stuck with the guy. But Trump is also another anti-convention guy, which is very interesting. In America and in most of these democracies, once you've been a leader and you pull off, you tend to leave space for the others. You tend to leave space even for your party leaders. You advise from the back. You really, really make sure that you're not part of the news. To the extent that Trump is even trying to suggest that he might want to contest again, is extraordinary. But don't forget, though, that unfortunately for the Democrats, Joe Biden, who was a fantastic, according to Obama, vice president, but an old man who's possibly not as sharp and as good as Barack Obama in his own many ways, and I think he's rather tired. So some of his falters, including some of these falling things in terms of perception and media and public opinion, makes him not look so much of the American dream and energy they want.
Isn't Trump fairly old as well?
He is, but he's a very robust, a guy, and he's a guy who will make news almost like the late Queen's late husband, who at 90 he's prepared to make news and make headlines. So from that point of view, whatever you say about him, he will say something and make fun and make the news. So that is not the same as Joe Biden. Joe Biden, by the way, 30 years ago was a fantastic guy. 40 years ago, in fact, Joe Biden was amongst the few white Americans who were prepared to stand using their electoral mandate and positions and to say no to apartheid in South Africa. At the time, the Reagans of this world were saying that the Boers in South Africa, who were 10 little percentage, were absolutely right to rule over us, and the majority of Africans were supposed to be subject like dwarf people. So for that, I have absolute respect for Joe Biden.
Yeah. Doctor, let me just come back to you. And you mentioned the Trump question. The FBI is still investigating, but also the Justice Department of the USA has come out to say that certain crucial and fundamental documents during the Trump administration were leaked out of the White House and, I don't know, taken to his residence or whatever. Are these some of the factors that you said are going to cost, should Trump resurface and try to endorse candidates here and there, they could be held accountable to such impunity of his administration? Are these some of the factors that you are trying to emphasize?
Like I told you, those, like you said, white, working, primitive Americans who are stuck with Trump. They believe he's their face. They probably even don't know what the entire world is thinking. But as long as
most Americans don't know anything that goes on beyond America, by the way.
So
no, that's true. Yeah.
Really?
There are actually those who think, and I've been following, that Trump won elections.
Yeah. It was rigged. Yeah.
Those who believe. And they believe strongly. And they still hold on to that big lie. And they are ready to remain with him. And that's what keeps running. And that's what runs his audiences, and the face of white America.
The savior of
coming
whites
back,
from extinction, if you like,
extinction.
in their own
And
America.
the country they founded, and it's being taken over by immigrants. And that's why they are now transporting immigrants from all the other Republican strongholds to Democratic
Gerrymandering.
transporting them and throwing them at the town square.
But in a way,
and all that. Yeah. And I think there are those stuck with there. So even if you expose him, or they think that's political, I realize that that group still thinks that he's being fought, he's being
Alienated deliberately, yeah.
because of his goodness, his good stuff. But truthfully speaking, on the side of the democracy, being the institutions of democracy and the business of the people, and the rules that govern us all being equal before the rules, the act of sneaking documents out of White House when there is a law providing for that, against that law, is an anti-democratic act, meaning you are lawless to some extent. But that may not affect his stronghold, even if you prove that because that's what I'm reading. They seem to be thinking that he's being witch hunted. And so that's anti-democracy. And that, yes, so it may not affect his base, but as time goes by, because I read from the polls seem to, when you look at the presidents around midterm elections, Joe Biden is not doing badly compared to even Obama or even Trump. At the point he was doing much. He's doing, that's why I have hope that he may actually still maintain the majority, at least in Congress, in a way. And so, yes, the documents could swing some, because those who believe in democracy and those who believe that the U.S. is saved by democracy, is among the fathers of democracy, may swing. But the hardliners,
the real red states like Georgia,
it's a witch hunt. It's a witch hunt, and Trump is their man. So
thank you, Congressman. The way the Joe Biden administration has handled the Russia-Ukraine war and conflict, how do we see it playing out? Do you think the Democratic Party is going to be held accountable for the actions of their administration in the way they've handled the Russia-Ukraine crisis? Because they came out to take a side. They were pro-Ukraine. They say, what Russia is doing is actually,
Did they take a side?
USA? Yes.
No, to their side. How do you take your own side? You say take a side.
Yes,
no,
exactly.
The Ukraine war is not about Ukraine and Russia.
Okay.
The Ukraine war is about NATO and Russia, and America is the chief of NATO.
Yeah.
So it's basically an ideological Cold War thing. Anglo-America with the West European guys moved onto the Russian borders, and shortly around the time just before I was born. There was an incident called Soviet missile crisis. I mean, the Cuban missile crisis, if you can remember, where America and then President Kennedy, ironically Democrat, they nearly bombed off Cuba. In fact, they nearly caused the first world nuclear war. Perhaps then we don't know where we would be in this world today. So that happened. So actually, it's cheeky of them, isn't it, that if the Russians could deploy missiles in Cuba, rather far away from the American borders, and then you expect NATO to be at the border of Russia, and you don't expect Russia not to respond. It's cheeky, but I know this really confuses Africans, and you Africans, I can't understand you guys. It's common sense. It's Cold War. It's not something as simplistic as Russia versus the others. And guess what? Britain moved, and they own an island, by the way, called Falklands Islands, the other end bordering Argentina. So how? That's cheeky, isn't it? And the other day, the Americans, Anglo-Americans, they mobilized, include as NATO, they can bomb Iraq. What were they doing out of that? And then you do that, and then you expect you're moving cautious. Because diplomatically, we are told, oh, it's Russia, whatever, whatever. But no, underlying, we know the truth that this is an idea to subdue Russia. Putin is not my friend, although Putin fantastically was amongst those guys who found themselves on the African soil those days when they were moving for African liberation in Southern Africa. So that's quite clearly the case. But no, it's nothing to do with Russia. In fact, they are lucky that I do not head or lead an African country. Because at this stage of the world, one of the things we should be doing as Africans is to say that, well, after the Cold War, particularly after 1989, and particularly after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, and particularly after the disaster of Iraq, after the disaster of Iraq, I think Africans should not be compelled again to think heavy, including at the UN, to take which sides. We should be focusing on our interests. So if America and Russia and perhaps even China want to go through their thing over Taipei and Hong Kong, they should do it. And for us as Africans, we should give our opinion from a distance. No, the Ukrainian war is absolutely right that Russia should just not walk over and bomb Ukraine, and that should be condemned. But Russia is doing that in part because, yes, Anglo-America are moving, sneaking in, drip, 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 drip. They want to go and subdue Russia. That's a fact. Yeah. So it's not which way we side with. It is simply that both sides are bad, and they're really not our guys. Young Africans should be finding ways in which we're able to protect African wealth in Congo, African wealth in Uganda, African wealth in Ghana, the sovereignty of South Africa, and the sovereignty of Nigeria, our land, so that we're able to grow our cocoa. It's a shame that this tiny little country, Ukraine, can grow more grain than East Africa. Just think about it, and that when they're at war, then the price of things goes up down there. Where are our leaders? Those are the issues.
Yeah, sure. Amazing. Doctor, he mentioned Africa should sort of, don't vehemently take a side, when these Western powers are fighting. But when the elephant fights, the grass actually suffers. So should Africans actually, does the solution to some of these global crises, is the solution in the global south, down here in Africa? For example, do you think Africa should have a strong opinion on the Russia-Ukraine issue? No. Because somehow it affects us. No. It does affect us. The price of fuel has gone high. The price of commodities have gone high. And this is partly hinged towards that crisis. Not at all. So shouldn't we have a strong stand and say this is wrong?
We should actually be spending more time in our idea labs, looking at
reorganizing ourselves. That's right. Yes.
This situation. This is where we should be led into our labs, working so hard and looking for ways of really taking advantage of this, just like it was in COVID, and rethinking and reflecting and looking at ways. We should actually talk less. I keep saying this: the Chinese. Let's keep quiet a bit and do our thing inside and think more and empower our Moses and the young people, skill them. And I hold the view from the age of 6. We should start being skilled. We don't have to wait. By 16, they should get a job, and by 18, they should be independent, so that they don't stress the retirement packages of their parents, because they're already weakened. So I think we should be in the labs, thinking, idea labs.
African problems, African solutions.
Chemical energy systems, it is how to define them ourselves. Unfortunately, we are caught in this globalist wave. And one of the reasons why is because we have over time become outposts of neo-colonialism. With leaders who are actually who talk big during the day, and at night they are real guards of exploitation. I posted a video last night on some group where a white-looking Tanzanian speaking Swahili was talking about Chinese on every street, selling even phones. Why are you? This should be the business of our people. And why some of us are thinking, maybe looking east, they are also, actually they are more brutal. I posted in the past saying, I would rather be in the hands of a new colonialist than this, because they are more brutal. They need more. They need to grow their GDPs. You can't even negotiate this, you can. So we should be in idea labs, trying with it. But since we are caught up in this
Globalization,
global
and
thing,
global
and that
community.
we are at the UN and we are asking for more power. I don't know who will give it to us. How can they give? I am surprised. I know they will talk, they will give big speeches, but who gives power to
Security Council.
at Security Council to people whose children are with flies all over and dying of hunger? They would just, yeah, I know it's a good talk and they should continue talking, but as they come out, they should even demonstrate it there by sleeping in cheap hotels, by making sure they are sending their people. But while many others are here working and doing the work and saving the people, doing more of inclusive policies and stuff like that. And so, yes, what do you do when someone is feeding you? What do you do when a secret admirer in the neighborhood is feeding your house?
You
A
become
secret admirer of your wife is feeding your household. What do you expect?
You become a mercy at whims.
Yes, and so what happens? What I see, neutral, or what, is a globalist attitude. But I am not really very surprised, because when you look at our health budgets, funded to 60% almost health budget alone by the West.
You
And,
say
and,
that
and the other
UK
day,
aid.
and the other day, just quickly, the other day.
Okay, as you give us, as you make that comment,
Yeah.
also give us your last words
But,
on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The other day there was this shouting by these boastful people in the state in Kampala, that bashing NGOs and bashing NGOs and bashing NGOs, only for the other day to bash imperialism of the oil pipeline guys, when these guys were being environmental opinion in context. And only the other day then for the headlines for the guys in town to say thank you for $11 million extra money to being given to us.
You see how they make us look stupid.
And
then I like the way they do it.
To buffer.
They make us look stupid. But you were saying, so now why are you saying thank you?
Indeed.
They keep giving it because they know it's power. Ruling you through the stomach. They know it's power.
Yeah.
So for you, you are useless. You are imperials. Then they send a check of $10 million.
And you say thank you. Yes.
And you call them partners. Yeah, so apparently the money was supposedly to buffer on poverty, which is absolutely a shame. And our founding parents in heaven are completely uncomfortable that the continent that we rebuilt, and particularly the Organization of African Unity, that at 1963, UPC was privileged to be at that table with fantastic ideas for building one united Africa, in which Deus is talking about where we should be in the labs. And I can see the big lab that we had in Tororo is now a forest in Utro in Tororo, which could have done COVID, could have done Ebola, and should be doing COVID and Ebola in the future. Is a swamp and sunk. There's something criminal happening on this continent by leaders. So I hope going forward, we're going to have emergent leaders of your generation who are men and women of repute, men and women who think, men and women who see what's happening in Ukraine, men and women who see what happened in midterm elections in the US, what is happening in Downing Street, and they think themselves and put themselves in those places and learn some lessons and say, we want to draw an African blueprint for the future. So that future is one for young people, that future is for young Africans, that future is for young Africans without flies, and many of those without flies are young female Africans. And for that, I would want to say into your program that going future, although we are three men here and I sometimes take exception to that, I'm delighted that one of the key producers here is a young, beautiful lady, and may them keep on growing and growing and growing and take part of this going forward, so that engineering and technology, side by side, social sciences around ourselves, we're able to determine a continent of Africa in which when guys in Downing Street look, they can also study the transitional process which is taking place in Uganda as a lesson for political science in London School of Economics, as indeed Downing Street did study the East African community of Julius Nyerere, Kenneth Kenyatta, and Milton Obote, that powerful bloc that they learned from the EU, the EU that the Brits came out of, and the EU for which is now a big disaster. So this continent is possible, this country is possible, but it's in the hands of young people.
Thank you, Congressman. Doctor, your last words.
Democracy is always the business of the people. We are talking democracy. Many can argue, you can argue, let it be the African democracy, let it be Chinese democracy. But whether it's Chinese democracy, African democracy, it must be the business of the people. The ideas of the people matter. Service delivered to the people, whether you have decided to cut it through and have it in a staged manner, it must be the business of the people.
Wow.
And so what we see in the West is still in the hands of the people. I've not seen anywhere the military saying, Johnson, you must accept Johnson. I have not seen the police arrest. It is the business of the people. We have a lot to learn. Whether you think it's African, whether you think it should be African way, whether you think it cannot, democracy cannot be autocracy. But even benevolent dictators are preoccupied by the concerns of the people. And so, to the young ones, learn from what is going on. I know your frame of reference is already convoluted. It's already hazy because you're using a frame of reference where you think a leader who has resigned, who has accepted to resign, is a weak leader. No, it's an act of humility. It's an admission that I am not up to the job, and yet the job is so serious for the people's well-being. And so to resign is an act of democracy. And so we need to reformat this frame of reference, and begin to believe. And partly that's the duty of leaders, and that's where I have always disagreed, as me, that possibly the duty of the leader cannot be to watch things move on and on. It's also to prepare the young people of a nation that will manage the years of your retirement. And so no one should ever fear, no leader worth the name should ever fear to retire. Because your seeds are always, they're planted among the young.
So plant good seeds, such a retirement.
Plant good seeds and assure your retirement and be an elder.
Wow. Thank you very much. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Congressman, for sparing the time to be on our show this afternoon. Well, to the viewers, you've heard it all. I don't want to just spoil whatever has been said, but rather wish you a lovely Friday and have a nice weekend. See you next week, same time, same place. Bye-bye.